Kash, welcome to Validated.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
So I want to talk about a ton of stuff today. I think you are one of the few people in the space that's uniquely positioned in working for a highly technical, highly competent team that is like unabashedly retail focused on a lot of its marketing, its product development. You know, you yourself, I think people would maybe a year ago, if first and foremost, have thought of you as a content and marketing person. And now maybe they think of you more as like a product strategist with your role at Jupiter. How would you refer to yourself?
I don't know. I like to think of myself as an operator, but you know, the market's never wrong in a sense. But yeah, you know, was part of the founding team of Super Team and then ran that for a little while, and now over at Jupiter as the cat herder. So because I do a lot of content, I see why people say that. But like the worst insult someone can give me is that I'm a KOL. That's just like, why did I spend all these hours doing all this work? I could have just done some random shady token deals and retired already.
Oh, completely agree. I think it's more though about like the public perception of what someone's job is usually very different than like what it actually is. And I think it's rare to find me, like for years I was like labeled as the comms guy, right, at Solana because that was like what you mostly saw me doing. But so I kind of want to talk a little bit about like how you balance those two roles and responsibilities, because it's pretty rare to find people who are prolific on the content side and also doing what we call, traditionally speaking, real work at a project or a company.
Yeah, well, I think one reinforces the other, quite honestly. So I would say maybe 15 to 20% of my time is spent on content stuff. And there I'm including things like the Jupiter live streams and public speaking and press and so on. And, you know, at least 80% of the time is spent on everything else. But what I have found is that like once I started doing content stuff, it made a lot of the operating stuff much easier. Like when I'd go into meetings, people had already seen like the ecosystem call, which I used to run, or they had seen whatever, like random videos or seen me on podcasts and stuff like that. And so there was like an instant connection that made it easier to do like partnerships work, or like product people kind of knew that, I don't know if I sound super smart, but I at least can speak without stumbling too much. And so people kind of come in with a little bit of I come in with a little bit of credibility there. So it's always been like a kind of a reinforcing thing. And then the fact that I spend most of my time doing, as you call it, like real work, means that the content is a little bit better than, you know, your average KOL who just kind of like reads a dev doc and then stops. So to the degree that the content stuff I do is any good, it's because I actually spend all my time doing real work. And part of the reason I'm good at the real work is because I do a lot of content stuff. So it's always my first advice to folks, especially if you're like new to crypto or if you're like a first-time founder. Do as much content as you can. You learn a lot about how to refine messaging, how to think about positioning, how to think about your audience. It's great for community building. You learn kind of like which people are attracted to what you're saying and can use them for user feedback and a bunch of other stuff. So I think it's a real hack that most people have still not gotten around to. And for good reason. Like I was very scared of doing it initially as well. Like I had never done content in my life until Super Team, and basically Bunmei, who we both know, kind of forced me into it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is scary, but like the highest ROI that you can get if you're only using whatever 10 to 20% of your time for it.
I think it's really interesting that people think of like influencer as a like external, almost like solo job, or if you get to be a big enough influencer, maybe then you have staff that work for you, but it's like fundamentally about like you and your relationship to the audience. But the parasocial relationship is actually one of the most powerful functions for business development. Like just as you're saying, when you get on a call or walk into a meeting and people feel like they know you already, there's a level of familiarity that just exposure to your face and your content and your streams and those sorts of things provide that is actually a huge leg up in all sorts of business development activities as well, but almost no one thinks of it that way.
Yeah, it's like a arbitrage of trust in a way, right?
Yes,
it's like whether
entirely.
it's like BD work or it's like hiring and recruiting, I think is easier. Certainly, or it has been for me in the past. And it's like just frankly grown the business. Like in the early days of Super Team when we were still, you know, I don't want to say when people were like, oh, it's like a cute little kind of community thing.
Sure.
By virtue of doing the content, we're able to like reach a much larger audience of people that can then be attracted and become like we can help them build or They can contribute to projects in some way. Founders would see it and then reach out and be like, hey, just like interested in what you're doing. How do we leverage Super Team? Or now with Jupiter, it's a similar kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, like I think Soul Strategies just invited me to they saw me emceeing at Accelerate and they're like, hey, you should come onto our Twitter space. I was like, great, sounds lovely. Why not?
Yeah, love it. So how did you find your way then from operations and creating, this super team, which is sort of, super team, I think as one of our mutual friends says, is like an elephant. You touch a different part of it, you get a different idea of what it is. In some places, it is about devs. In some places, it's entirely about regulatory arbitrage. What sort of brought you from that world to decide, hey, I want to actually go work for Jupiter. I want to actually focus on one project as opposed to this sort of very broad-based role of different types of development all around the world?
Yeah, I think there were three reasons. So the first one is that Super Team, as you know, is a nonprofit, right? There's no token associated. Any token you see is fake. Don't buy it. And we're grant supported and supported by ecosystem teams, right? Who would kind of put in money to do all sorts of activities. And that was really fun. And, did that for 3.5 years or so in the end. But there was part of me that just kind of missed being a business guy and having wake up every day and check my revenue dashboard and whatever else. Because I've started a few companies in the past and that's really where my heart lies. So there was one thing there about just missing revenue. There was another thing around just the scale of it. So having been with Super Team back when there were literally 1 members or 2 members or something like that, and then scaling that to, I think when I left, we had 14 countries live with full-time bilingual teams. Part of the future I saw was okay, we'll go from 14 to 30 or whatever. And it's not as unique of a challenge, once you kind of figure out that initial, 0 to 1 and then 1 to 10.
Yeah.
And then third, honestly, there was a part of me that was feeling a little bit guilty at Super Team towards the end, where because my own public profile had kind of grown and people saw me as the face of it, there was a way in which I was kind of crowding out the local country leads and some of the other folks in the organization unintentionally. I'm a big fan of this thing called the bus test, right? Where if you as a community leader were to get hit by a bus, does the community remain or does it disband, right? And if it disbands, you never really had a community in the first place. You had an audience of some kind.
Yeah.
And I could feel that kind of pressure happening. And so between those three factors of hey, I kind of miss this old world. I'm kind of in the mood for a new challenge and it's probably a right time because we had more than enough excellent community leaders at Super Team. Those three things kind of came into play. And I had been kind of casually advising Meow and the Jupiter team for, a few months at that point. And when I told him I was kind of thinking about a change, he jumped up and was like, yeah, let's do some fun stuff together.
Yeah. So I would say, I think operations is probably the least appreciated division within a blockchain project. It's also one of the most important, but usually it's okay, well, we've got the devs, they're the most important people. And then it's well, marketing is doing their thing. They sort of help us grow. And then operations, we just have to do well enough to not fail at paying people or owe a bunch of taxes or something like that. So I think for a lot of folks here who maybe are not as familiar with what operations looks like at a high growth, high performance protocol at Jupiter, what does that actually mean? When you were talking to Meow, what were the problem sets at Jupiter that they were we don't have anyone capable of addressing these, and it looks like you can come in and do that?
Yeah, well, first I would say there's tons of talented people at Jupiter, so it's not as if I was there was no one capable of doing it at the time. But there's a very interesting fact about Jupiter's organizational structure, which is that there's no org chart, and there's really just 2 teams. There's an engineering team, and then there's an ops team, and the engineers outnumber the ops people, maybe 10 to 1 or something like that. It was a relatively small team. And what's ended up happening is that a bunch of the general functions that you would have in other organizations, marketing or investor relations or community and content and all these kinds of things, just going to get wrapped into operations as well. And so it was because I could do a lot of different things that I felt, or I might have seemed like an attractive candidate to Meow and them. But when I think about operations, I think about it at 3 different levels, right? So first, there's just you're a plumber, and your goal is just to make sure that the devs can get as much work done as possible, that people feel good at all times, that they have the resources and the processes set up to actually get real work done.
Yeah, no one really cares how good their plumbing is. They just care that it's not bad.
Yeah, you only care when the pipe explodes, right? Like, so
Exactly.
when things break is when you're like, we just called it. So in that sense, operations can be a bit of a thankless job at times. Uh, the second layer up, I think of operations oftentimes as the glue within a team. And certainly that's
Mhm.
the case at Jupiter, where we have individual kind of product leads. And it's the ops team that I've kind of built out with this product ops role that kind of connects and makes sure that everyone kind of stays on the same page. And that there's like, where there are synergies, it becomes obvious because the operations team is kind of in contact with everybody and knows everything that's going on in a way that any individual product might not. So, like small examples might be within Jupiter, the way that our portfolio product interacts with our pro trading product to, look up wallets and stuff
Yep.
like that. Uh, or like notifications in the Jupyter mobile app with other associated companies like Drip just happened earlier today. So there's like that kind of connective tissue that comes in. And then certainly at Jupyter, my role ends up being a lot of strategy because there's not like an explicit strategy function. So it's like, okay, what are the markets that we should go into? We just announced Jupyter Lend as like
Yep.
a major new product line that I was very deeply involved in. How do we position it? What is like the user value of it? Who are the partners that we need to bring on board to it? And so on. So I think at Jupyter, operations is a pretty expansive title, which works out pretty well. And I would encourage any teams that are thinking about getting operations people, that is the way to do it. Like operations end up oftentimes being kind of generalists who are good at, good enough to kind of like write some copy over here, good enough to kind of set up an Airtable flow over here, good enough to kind of figure out or to like handle user feedback sessions over there, and sometimes do even more.
Yeah. So I want to kind of dive into that a little bit because you sort of said there's engineering, and then you didn't quite say this, but there's everything else.
Yeah.
So what where do you guys draw the line between what is in engineering and what is in operations? Because I think there's a lot of things you can look at that are like, okay, this isn't like really operations, it's not really engineering. Like what does DevRel fall under, or what would product marketing fall under?
Yeah, those all kind of end up falling into operations.
Okay.
So like the guy that leads our DevRel efforts, for example, shout out to YY, he's on the product ops team. But like the simplistic kind of way to think about it is like people who write code and don't is probably like the line,
Sure.
the general line that's drawn. But Joe, who leads a lot of the Spot stuff, along with Aaron on the technical side, he will also be involved in kind of figuring out product positioning and so on. So it becomes more of like a collaborative effort. Again, I don't know how this works. Certainly, when I first joined Jupyter, it was jarring because I'm old fashioned. I like a title. I like departments. I like who's accountable for what.
Sure.
And I came into Jupyter and it's a free for all, right? It's like everybody can do anything at any given time.
Yeah.
And I've come to really appreciate that about the company, where it's very amorphous. And it's part of the reason we don't have job titles is that you don't want to put anyone into a box, right? So you find people that can kind of do it all to some degree. So like there are some ops people that focus more on like support and product documentation and stuff, and then there's ops people like me that are doing much more kind of like strategy work and investor relations and things like that.
So this is exactly like a piece I want to tease out a little more because it statistically doesn't work at pretty much any company, right? And Solana had this problem, right? For years, Solana Labs was a very flat organization. There was no road mapping. There was no planning. It was just like, we wouldn't even know what was in. It was kind of like a classic Nancy Pelosi. We have to pass the bill to figure out what's in it. We got to ship the release to figure out what's actually in it.
Yeah.
And that's changed, right? And a lot of the way that that's changed has been to bring more process and structure. I think if you look at Jupyter, you would say, wow, they actually have a whole bunch of different business lines, right? The tagline now is the everything app, right? You guys are launching new products, you're building new features. One would assume that there's a highly planned, fairly verticalized structure under the hood. So like, how does the chaos work? Give us a little bit of like peek inside there about how you can because this is not a product where everyone is focused on one singular goal, right? It would be one thing if you had one core product and you had a bunch of engineers that were just like, make the thing better. But you have competing demands on engineering time. You have competing demands on like product designer times. You have products that have to talk to one another, but no one likes building connectivity usually. Like, how do you make it all work?
It is how would I say this? It is a labor of love is maybe one way to
Yeah.
think about it. So like the expanse of Jupiter, I think is oftentimes missed by a lot of people, right? Because they think of Jupiter primarily as like a DEX aggregator. The truth is we have 9 different products that generate relatively substantial amounts of revenue. And then another, at least 3 or 4 that are free products, right? So it's somewhere like a dozen unique products within this company that I think we're about up to like 95-ish people. So it's like still relatively small for, whatever a
Right, but
multi-billion
this is like
dollar endeavor.
very much the stage where any other software company would have verticalized into departments. There would be the lending team, the swap team, the pro team, the whatever team.
Yeah. And in fairness, we do have some of that for sure. But I think that there's some kind of a trade-off that like you give up process and kind of predictability. And, that can be difficult for some people, and it's certainly not an environment for everybody. But what you gain in return is kind of speed and creativity. So usually what will happen is like someone random will just like have an idea of like, hey, we should just like do this. Like, wouldn't it be cool if we did this thing? Like that's actually the funny story. That's how Perp started, where there's a developer named Anyhow at Jupiter, and he was just like, what'd be cool is if we just like had perps. And so I think Xiang was like, okay, let's go build it. They built it in like a few weeks, and then now it's like our leading revenue generator. Anyhow, I think was on like the routing team at the time, but because he didn't kind of feel boxed in to only be thinking about routing or whatever it was that he was working on, it kind of like enabled this creativity to come to the fore. But the major caveat here is that it only works if everyone is like all in. I thought we worked pretty hard at Super Team. If you ask any of the Super Team leads, they'll tell you that we worked pretty hard. I did not. It was, again, that junior varsity to varsity kind of jump in terms of intensity. So it's 7 days a week. Meow, who's the co-founder, he sleeps, I think, like on average 4 hours a night. He works every single day, all the time. And he's kind of like setting the pace for everybody. So you lose perhaps some like efficiency. Like we probably would not have to work 16 hours a day if there was more process and kind of clearer planning and so on. But the benefit that you get in terms of speed and creativity, I think the proof is in the pudding that it seems to be working. Yeah. Whether it continues to work is the major question. So like, I'm guessing you've heard of the rule of 3 and 10 from Sequoia. Yes. Yeah. So like we're at that 90 level, which is like a very critical level. So how we 10x from here, I think is the major question that we're spending a lot of time thinking about internally, especially on the back of, I think we did 6 or 7 acquisitions in the last 8 months. So you also have this added problem of like integrating all these different teams, and how do you get those to work?
Yeah, I would say that this is, this may sound not like a compliment, but it is, but like, I think you guys are probably the most Web 2 team in Web 3. In the sense of like, you have a lot of like verticalized, not internally verticalized, but verticalized product lines that are addressing different markets. You've taken an acquisition route, which is extremely rare for crypto. And usually acquisitions are like Keep and NuCypher merging to become, Threshold or Thesis Network, which is like, okay, these 2 products don't really make sense to exist on their own, but we bring them together. And this is different. This is much more like we have a core product. You have something that's maybe not working or something that could be really additive to our structure. We're going to bring that in as a voluntary activity as opposed to like building it ourselves. So there's like 3 places I want to go with this. I want to talk about acquisition strategy and how you think it works and how it's similar and different in the Web 2 and Web 3 space. I want to talk about product development and how you guys make decisions when you're building the Everything app. The Everything app can do anything, and that's like a huge decision matrix framework question. And then a little bit about like building trust among team members when you're working in this type of environment. So let's maybe actually start out with the second one first around, and then we'll this kind of rolls into acquisitions, I think, but like, how do you make decisions around what makes sense to build, what makes sense to acquire, what's a market worth addressing, and how you think about the ordering of these things?
I would say somewhat uniquely, there's actually like 2 tracks that kind of determine products. And so there's what we might call the, what's the best way to say this? There's products that we would call, I'm trying to think of a non-pejorative way to say it. What might be quote unquote obvious products that we should build, right? We're the dominant player in spot. We should probably have a pro trading offering as well, right? Like that's an obvious, like it's kind of like a linear thing that you would expect as you grow out and you kind of grow horizontally. You want to add it in. It's very clearly value add. And then there's others which are kind of like meta defining, where we're trying to like actually change what the meta is within crypto. And both of those kind of happen in parallel. And both of those kind of happen with different people within the organization, actually. So I myself do a lot more of the kind of what you might call like linear product growth or like clearly additive kind of product growth. And Meow is much more like the meta defining kind of guy and the types of things that he wants to do. And so like you look at the Drip House acquisition that we did recently.
Yes.
That is to further an idea that he really is excited about, and rightfully so, around like kind of community-based tokens and how to better create dynamics for creators and community leaders on chain that are kind of like non-extractive, non-predatory, and so forth. And Drip with 10,000 verified creators is a great place to kind of like experiment there. And then you have something like Jupiter Lend, which is obviously like much cleaner. That's a proven business model. It obviously works. There's other major companies that are doing it. And so that decision is a little bit different. Now, obviously, Meow and Xiang are involved across all of that stuff. And I end up being involved across all that stuff as well. But the kind of genesis points are oftentimes somewhat happening in parallel. So it's almost like we have like an R&D lab within Jupiter. And that R&D lab is like Meow's head. And then we have like a normal business lab, which is, more me and Xiang's domain. Although again, Xiang is across both camps as well.
Yeah. So when you look at something like the Drip House acquisition, I was surprised by that. And I was surprised by that because it seems like most of the tools that Drip is building that Jupiter is building or engaged in or developing further the actions of trading in one way or another, right? Portfolio management is very closely tied to having confidence in the trades that you're making. Perps, lending, spot, swap, pro trade, all of that stuff is kind of in that domain. I think what you said just now is like Meow had a little bit of a different thesis for the Drip acquisition. What was that thesis, and then how do you build when you're going off in non-core directions on product? There's obviously a lot of like people internally, I'm sure, had lots of opinions on should we do this, shouldn't we do this? How do you manage those types of things?
Well, the opinions thing, we keep a pretty small circle on those kinds of decisions, quite honestly, so that there's not too many chefs in the kitchen. So, that was a conversation between me, Meow, Xiang, and Zen at the time. But yeah, indeed, it is definitely a little bit of an oddball thing. I think that the creativity that's needed to be really successful in acquisitions is to be horrendously optimistic, right? So you have to think, like that specific decision was, okay, we're building this DeFi super app where you should be able to trade everything. We think that NFTs are not going anywhere, right? Like hey, maybe we'll never see like the art PFP craze, but RWA is coming on chain, long tail assets. You saw XP raise a big round around like movie or concert tickets and so on. And so if you want to be able to buy any asset within Jupiter, we need some NFT experience. Okay, that's kind of like the base case. That'll work. Second, we look at the talent and we're like, well, are these people going to be the right ones to be able to do it? And yeah, I mean, you and I both know the Drip team, like they're absolute killers. So that was an easy decision. And the third is like, okay, well, what is the kind of like dream scenario that could come from this that would really be the 10 or 100x asymmetric upside, right? If we can just integrate NFTs, sure, we can learn how to do that ourselves. That's complicated, but not impossible to figure out. And yeah, there's plenty of great talent out there. But Drip already had the super valuable asset of crypto curious people or people who sometimes didn't even know that they were using kind of crypto technologies under the hood. And that felt like a really exciting kind of new base for us to expand into. So we're buying the tech and the team as well as like the audience and the kind of the new frontier that audience provides us to move into. So rather than, just trying to do meme coins with existing kind of crypto degens, the idea is like, well, what interesting things can we do with the Drip audience that you can't really do unless you have 10,000 creators and millions of collectors and so on. So from that perspective, it was an asset that like it would have taken us years to build that kind of frontier for ourselves. But if we can just kind of purchase the land, we can actually grow much faster.
Drip is not historically a platform that monetizes based on fees. I think it was probably the most credible attempt to bring advertising into the Web3 space, and not through like, here's an interstitial trying to sell you like a Happy Meal,
right.
But like creators can, can spend money to get collections in front of people. You have this sort of currency, which is mostly an attention token. It's not like a monetary value token. That's very different than a lot of the other products and spaces that Jupiter has been in. Do you guys see this as like a new type of revenue line potentially, or something that sort of increases the utility of existing revenue lines?
I think it increases the utility of existing revenue lines. We're also, like I said, we're like pretty optimistic on where things can go, but like the honest truth is that we did not buy it for its revenue. Like it makes some good money and stuff, but like that was definitely not the idea. Another kind of important part of the thesis, right, is like, okay, if we're building this DeFi super app, Jupiter has relatively good brand recognition and usage among crypto regulars, right? So like if we really want to start to get more people, we have to move up the funnel, which is why we launched Jupiter Mobile. And that's again where like Drip comes in. If these people are crypto curious, can we get them kind of like hooked on crypto in the right way and then get them to like start to use the other products and start to cross-sell some offerings to them and create some more value? So monetizing Drip directly was never going to be like again, hopefully I'm wrong and it's a giant monetization possibility. Like that'd be great. And I think that's possible. Sure. But it was not like the key focus rather than buying revenue. And in fact, this is true for a lot of our acquisitions where there are a lot of great teams, a lot of great tech building in great spaces that maybe weren't always able to get the unit economics to really work out, especially when they have a fair amount of like venture capital behind them. And that's like the arbitrage opportunity that we see, which is like, hey, we don't need you to be super revenue generating. We don't need you to be $1 billion company, but there's other things about you that make you attractive to us that might make you ugly to others, but that's actually great for us, right?
Yep. So continuing on the product strategy and acquisition front, lending is a big market. It's a bit of a cutthroat market. It's a hard market to, break into, but it tends to be not a winner take all market, but like a winner take most or two winners take most kind of market. What was the decision framework there that this was not something you guys were going to go try and acquire, but this was something that you wanted to try and build yourself?
So interestingly, this is it's not an acquisition per se, but it is something that, again, we're finding outside talent to build. So Jupiter Lend is actually being built primarily by the Fluid team, who also created InstaDApp. So they're like a big Ethereum team with tons of DeFi expertise.
Right.
And so they're the same kind of strategy applied. This one, we're kind of doing more like a joint venture. So, there's like some arrangements between us on the commercials, and they'll kind of build it out, and we handle distribution and, some product strategy stuff and so on. That one, it's in that same kind of spirit of like the way to move fastest is not to try to like teach ourselves how to do something, but rather just like go find the best people in the world at this, figure out a way to make it commercially interesting for them, and then do it together. Because I think what the overall strategy is that, hey, Jupiter has kind of aggregated all this user attention, right? What are all the things that we can direct that attention to that'll be very useful? Aggregation theory, like as you know, is a big thing in Web2. Ben Thompson did a lot of writing on it. And for some reason, people have not thought about it as much in Web3, but I think it certainly applies to Jupiter. I mean, even on just like the DEX aggregator side, right? Like you're aggregating, commodifying all of the DEXs behind it. And then you have Jupiter as the single, simple to use interface that allows the best tech to kind of rise behind in the same way that Google allowed the best information to rise behind their, single search bar.
Right.
And so I think that lending was like a natural kind of extension of, hey, you could trade everything, but in this kind of future of this global unified market, you want to make the assets productive as well. And we knew from like our own users, they're all using other borrow lend markets. Well, it's like, if you love Jupiter, you're checking it every day, we now have this portfolio tool that's even more sticky, then surely you'll probably be likely to use this. Yeah. And then, like I said, we just found like the best tech builders that we could find. And I think it's, fairly consensus that the Fluid boys are on another level when it comes to DeFi innovation. And so, that's where that one kind of was born. And it helps that there was like personal relationships that have been pre-existing for a long while. But that's the story on Jupiter Lending.
So you mentioned a bunch of work on aggregation theory. And one of the things that I think separated Web 2 and Web 3 for a very long time was Web 3 was almost anti-aggregation. And it was anti-aggregation on the idea of, like, there's this Web 2 dream. If you go back to the original, like, Web 2.0, and we called it 2.0, like founding visions and documents, there was a lot of talk about open APIs. And this idea of composability was actually something that was baked into the Web 2 idea that Expedia would have an open API and you could hit it up from, Jabber Messenger or something like that. This wasn't quite the chatbot vision of the world, but it was the idea that, like, the same way anyone can permissionlessly load a web page, it should be possible for me to permissionlessly interface with your program API. That's like a very normal thing in crypto, but this was like Web 2, right? You were going to be able to call Facebook data from, something else. That never happened. And it never happened for probably two reasons. One is the security model didn't really work in Web 2. But the second was there wasn't really an incentive to push you off a platform or make it like what we saw are the Web 2 applications that were more open grew slower than the Web2 applications that were more closed.
Hmm.
Crypto for a while has pushed back on this idea, and not in open source versus closed source, but the idea that like I would not be able to compose with another program is still very foreign in crypto. But the way you guys are approaching this, like you're getting to a place where like, I think the Google search bar is a really great answer for this, because for years, Google was the best aggregator at bringing the best information forward. Pretty famously now, Google search has gotten worse. They've intentionally made the product worse. So you have to click more pages so they show you more ads, because at the end of the day, Google is not a search company, it's an ad tech company. How do you think about balancing the long-term incentives there when you're starting to launch products that like instead of, there's a version of this where you could have said, okay, Jupiter Lending is going to be a lending aggregator. It's not going to be a primary lending platform. Like that feels to me, and maybe it didn't feel that way internally, but it feels to me like a pretty big change in some of the way you guys are thinking about product development, as saying, instead of taking existing things and bringing them together, we're actually going to use our distribution size to launch new things. Is that kind of the right way to think about this?
I think it's directionally correct for sure.
Okay.
On the lending product in particular, there were some things that we were, should I say, dissatisfied with the current state of the market that we thought could be done better because we saw the Fluid guys doing it better. And so we thought from like a raw technical perspective, there was like some innovations to be had that we could not aggregate that already existed. But yeah, it's also like a maturity kind of thing. I think like as the company grows and as the user base kind of grows, you can do new things that you could not do before. And I don't think in the early days of Jupiter, I wasn't there, but I'd be surprised from my conversations with Miao and Xiang that they thought that the brand would be like this trusted or would become like the default gateway for a lot of people into crypto. And so that's like opened up some new opportunities, even if it is slightly different than the original intent. But I think like undergirding all of this and what I think is going to prevent us from going down like the closed kind of Web2 route is like a sincere belief that Solana is awesome and that Solana is still like microscopic in the grand scheme of things, right? Like we're doing on Solana, whatever, $4 billion a day in volume. You know, there's like a few individual stocks will do $4 billion a day in volume. Like the whole of our industry is like so small that we're like, we know we're a long way away from any type of kind of extractive behavior, let's say. So we've always we like very firmly believe that the best way for Jupiter to grow is for all of Solana to grow, including our DeFi competitors. Like JLP is a great example of this, right? It's like a $1.6 billion asset or whatever.
Right.
These numbers might be a little bit off, so give me a bit of grace on it. But I think something like 35 or like more than a third of Drift's open interest is just people like hedging JLP, right? I believe the JLP multiplier or JLP vaults on Camino, it's like one of their largest revenue generating products, if not their largest revenue generating products, certainly among them. So in a sense, Drift is a direct competitor, right? Like they have a perps exchange, they have a borrow-lend protocol. Camino obviously has swap and has borrow-lend. And we've taken like no measures whatsoever to do anything about that. Like we love that other people are building on top of JLP. And we think it's good for the space and it's good for us in the long term as well, and kind of maintains our position as a cornerstone. I think both culturally and tactically, there's a lot of benefits in crypto to making sure that other people can kind of like extend and build on top of what you're building. Even with like Jupiter Lend, what's so exciting about the architecture of it is that we actually separate out the protocol layer from the liquidity layer. And so the liquidity layer can actually be used for a bunch of other protocol use cases in the future, right? Including other joint ventures or other kind of like shared vault structures or whatever else might come up. And so that is, again, why that architecture was so interesting to us rather than trying to aggregate everything that already existed.
One of the really interesting words you used there was joint venture. Going back to kind of like Web 2 versus Web 3 components, you do not see many joint ventures in Web 3. What does a JV even mean in Web 3?
Really, I think JV is like my corporate speak for it. The real, like the truth of it is more as like a team up, basically. But it's trying to find, and this is probably true of the overall Jupiter strategy around M&A, is like where are people complementary to what we're already good at, where like 1 + 1 = 3, right? So in Fluid's case, Semic and Some, incredible builders, have built, their products have billions of dollars in TVL and so on. They are not as, and I hope if you're watching, guys, I don't take this the wrong way, but like they, I think would say themselves that they're not like as deep into like the community building aspect, certainly the retail facing aspect, the content aspect, and so on that we are, right? Like the distribution edge, we might call it. And so the team up was just like, hey, if we can handle distribution and can help on kind of simplifying the UX and whatever else, and you can handle the deep tech of it all, then clearly we're going to get something bigger than either of us could do alone. So that is about the extent of it. I honestly don't know. There's not like a new company that is like, we both own 50% of or something like that. It's
Okay.
much more informal in our case.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. As you guys kind of expand and you look at becoming like more of a portal for people getting involved in crypto, how do you balance that with the needs of those of us who already know what crypto is? Like, there's sort of this thing that's happened where I find it extremely hard to use Coinbase. I don't know, like, if you've used it much, like on the retail side, but like the interface is deeply confusing because I think it's built to mimic like a brokerage account. Like they've gone very far in the Web2 banking analogy where the idea of like balances and cash versus stablecoin balance and a lot of these things are separated in ways where I end up clicking like 7 times to find the thing I'm trying to get to because it doesn't look like a Web3 product. And you guys spend a ton of time on UI and design and UX work, right? And like the Jupiter aggregator landing page and system, it got much simpler over the last few months than sort of what it used to look like. But it still is like fairly straightforward on this. How do you think about that challenge of like, you need to do a bunch of things. You need to get people onboarded, and then you kind of have to train them on how to use a Web3 interface. But do you also still have to make it usable for those of us who've been in the industry for a bunch of years to come in and being able to get to what we need to do? I think this is one of the things that I see many exchanges and many dApps kind of failing on is they build an interface for one type of customer, they ace that customer, and then they have to go on to build stuff for another group of individuals, and that's a very hard process. So like, how do you guys think about like these multiple audiences, like in a very practical sense of like speaking a design language they understand?
I think that you've nailed it in the sense that like that is among our hardest challenges. In fact, we're kind of like thinking about redesigning the homepage and redesigning a few of the products accordingly. So I don't think there is any silver bullet. We are deeply immersed in that problem right now. To the degree that we have been successful on it, I think there's an emphasis on simplicity for the products that we know are important for everyone to use. And then the more advanced products, we kind of go a little bit off the deep end on. So like a concrete example here, we have these token pages now. And there was a lot of discussion of like, okay, how simple should they be? Should they look like Phantom's token pages that you might have seen on their website? 3 big numbers, 2-3 paragraphs of text, a nice big logo, easy for anyone to use.
Yeah.
Or should we go down the more professional route, which would look something more like whatever Bird Eye or GMGN or Photon or these kind of products, right? And there we just kind of thought about, okay, what is the core user that we're trying to attract here? And where is the value going to be the deepest? And so on the token page, after some initial conversations, and big credit to Joe and Aaron on this, there was an understanding that we could create novel metrics that no one else had, and that would add unique value to some more of the pro traders. And so if the opportunity is there for us to make more value for pro traders than for everyday retail traders, then we'll go in that direction. We are also discussing like, should we have a simplified token page and then like you like flip a toggle and it goes to pro? Like there's a lot of those kinds of conversations that are happening right now. It's hardest on products like perps, which are just like inherently more complex, Yes. And so we try to do things like and be really responsive to user feedback on just anytime we see a support ticket of like, hey, I accidentally clicked on the wrong button because I didn't know where this was going. And then trying to refactor the UI and the notifications and the warnings and types like that that make it work. But honestly, a lot of the heavy lifting there, taking someone from like a new user to an intermediate user, will be done by the community. And this is like one of the real strengths of Jupiter is that unlike most projects, we still have like a really active Discord. We have like, 400 videos on the YouTube channel that like tell you how to use every single product and what every single thing means. So we take content and community really seriously. And I think that's what allows us to have better retention from users as they kind of grow into more mature users and kind of push people down that funnel.
Yeah, I think many of these sort of projects that are focused on like onboarding people to crypto, people tend to graduate off of them. Yeah. It's like, oh, I started using the in-app swap, and then I graduated to using a real DeFi app because I realized I was paying, 80 basis points.
85 bips,
like, yeah, 100%, right, on a swap or something along those lines. How do you But at the same time, like there's a reason the in-app wallet swaps charge high fees is because it makes it makes the developers a lot of money. And this
Yeah.
isn't like making money is a good thing. This isn't a bad thing, right? Like different fee structures apply to different users and different experiences and all that. But because you are going from the complete noob to like the person who's trying to clear 10 mil over 24 hours, like how do you think about those types of structures? Like, are you just not in a stage where revenue maximization is even anywhere on the goals because it is just in that grow phase? Do you think about like, look, we're just going to go to almost a more SaaS model where like we're going to drop our fees on retail and we're really going to be focusing just on volume and like build these things in a very different way? What do revenue operations look like for you?
Jupiter is terribly undermonetized right now, right? If you can believe it, right? I think Jupiter went 3.5 years without charging any fees whatsoever on swaps, right? The number one swap aggregator, the number one place where swaps were happening. No fees. I think we just turned on an optional fee. We still offer free swaps, an optional fee, which is still from 0 to 10 bips, depending on what you're trading. So it's still like, an order
Very
of magnitude
low.
cheaper. Yeah. That mostly comes back to this idea that we're building, we're assuming a world in which the crypto ecosystem grows dramatically, that like we still have another 10x, if not more, in front of us. And so when you have that mindset, you're not thinking about cycle to cycle, right? You're thinking on like 5 and 10 year timeframes. And on that kind of time frame, the only thing that matters right now is growth. Like we see competition, yes, happening within crypto and all the excellent DeFi teams that are out there, but we're also looking at like Coinbase and Robinhood and eToro. Like those guys are going to come on chain, and we need, before they really make the full jump, as much growth as possible is required. And so that's always been our guiding philosophy of like, what is the minimum amount of fees that we can charge in order to ensure that like we can kind of fund operations and keep everyone happy. Another concrete example of this is the JLP pool, right, which is like the liquidity provider token for our Perps platform. 75% of those fees go right back into the JLP pool itself, right, to give an APY. I think it's like 17% right now on this index fund product.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of teams that would just keep 100% of that, right? Like it's just like, yeah, we'll take all of this, or we'll keep 75, we'll give you 25 or something else like that, right? Or there's a lot of teams that would be out there that would just turn off manual mode and be like, hey, the only way to use this product is you have to pay now. Or even like on Jupiter Mobile, we could have easily just charged the industry standard rate at whatever, 85 to 100 bips, and instead we charge 10, or like 2 to 10, right? Not always 10. It's like stablecoin swaps are still free. Not the case everywhere else, just in case you didn't know, people who are watching at home, you might be paying on those elsewhere. So yeah, our long-term orientation, I think, is really helpful there, where if we're trying to maximize growth because we're not trying to cash out, that is really where it comes together. Like, another like really clear example of this, Meow himself, there was like this DAO vote that happened around this 2030 kind of time frame where Meow himself will not get a single Jupe token until the year 2030. The company started in 2021, right? So I don't know how many founders are out there that would say, I will work for 9 years on this project, every single day, and not take a single, a single token out of it. Like most founders are, let's launch a token before the product is live. Let's sell it on secondaries. Let me get out before the bear market hits. And so I think when you have that very different kind of like ethic and approach towards company building, a lot of these other decisions get a lot easier to make. And I think that's part of the reason that it's kind of fueled growth, is that in an industry that is so obsessed with short-term gains, we are one of the few teams that is obsessed with like long-term value creation. And that's, all that you need in order to be able to really succeed, I think, is to, zag when everyone else is zigging.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think sometimes Meow's like very intense commitment to things like that almost come off as like, oh, what's he hiding? Like there's no,
let me tell you what he's
a
hiding.
secret stash of Jupe somewhere,
No, let me tell you what he's hiding. The man is insane. He is like absolutely addicted to the game. He's addicted to like growing crypto, and he's a true like ideologue in that sense of like the value of on-chain permissionless technology and how much it can help other like random people around the world is massive, and that's what he cares most about. And honestly, the same is true for most people that work at Jupiter. I personally am well compensated, but I certainly could be making more elsewhere. I didn't join just for the money. Like I joined because I want to be a part of a team where everyone is using the North Star as like user value and industry growth rather than, revenue growth or something like that in the short term.
Yeah, I actually have like a whole thesis about like the teams that comp in the top 5% are the ones that are most likely to not be successful.
I think that's probably true. That's a nice that's a banger tweet if
Yeah.
you include the companies and you show which companies are paying so well.
It's kind of this funny thing where it's like the thing I tell people when they ask me for kind of like career advice is like, you have a very limited period of time where you can afford to make no money. And you should go and make sure that during that period of your life, you are getting as many experiences and knowledge and like working for places that are not necessarily paying you the most, but they're the places you're going to learn the most, because you, hopefully, we all hope to age out of that place very, at some point where it's like, okay, well, like I now have kids and kids are expensive and like I can't live on, a right out of school or school dropout salary, but like in the time you can do that, like so many people I know focused on value, like money and monetary compensation coming out of college, and they had starting salaries that were 4x my starting salary, and maybe now they're making 7x what my starting salary was, right? And you're just sort of like, oh, you peaked early here. Like this is not the way to actually make yourself useful over the long term.
Totally agree. I think that like too many people optimize for financial capital while discounting social capital, intellectual capital, spiritual capital. Like, do you actually like the thing that you're doing, or are you just like, a cog in a machine?
Yeah.
And the more you can optimize for those, I think that's why people are attracted to Jupiter. It's why I was attracted to Jupiter, is like learning a shit ton, operating on a scale that I never could have operated on before. So like the type of conversations that the people I get to meet, like the social capital is incredible. So all of those kinds of things really do pay off, but you just have to make sure that you're attracting the right folks. And listen, not every company is for everybody. I totally get it. You have a big mortgage and 3 kids. Listen, you're probably not going to get the salary that you need at Jupiter alone. Like you're going to have to take some risk, and that's fine. That's just kind of the nature of the beast.
Well, hey, Kash, thank you for joining us today. If folks are interested in finding out more about, I'm sure most people are familiar with the actual Jupiter products, but if they're interested in kind of digging a bit deeper into how Jupiter works, in potentially working for you guys, in some of the other products you guys are building, where are the sort of non-standard avenues people can learn about Jupiter?
So one that is underappreciated is the Discord. I think most people, including myself, have a pretty negative kind of connotation with Discord after whatever the 2021 cycle, where it was all just Discord farming. Our Discord is actually quite good, and the community is like incredibly supportive. So if you have like even deep technical questions, the dev channel in there is incredibly active. If you have any feedback, it's all very active. So definitely encourage people to try out Discord. Just kind of grit your teeth, sign in, and it'll be worth it. If you're like an analyst or someone else who's watching, maybe you're a big Jupe token holder, underappreciated how easy I am to reach. You can just DM me. I respond to basically every DM. So just let me know, reach out. That's easy enough. And then I would say that our support portal is actually really good. We're really invested in making support like industry leading. So we have a full-time 5-person support team, which I think is relatively rare in DeFi.
Wait, I got to push on this a little bit. What does that look like? Like, famously, support doesn't exist in Web3 because you can kind of, with great power comes great responsibility, right? And that's been the thesis of the space forever. What do the support people do?
They answer tickets because we get a ton of tickets. I mean, one of the, I don't want to call it the downsides, but one of the consequences of having like a very retail focused audience is you have a lot of people that are like, hey, I thought I was getting this, and they maybe don't understand slippage, for example, that like their slippage was set to 20% and they didn't realize, and they're like, what happened? Where did my tokens go? Or, they try to send funds to like a mint address rather than like somebody's wallet address, right? Like they just make these kind of relatively straightforward errors that you and I are kind of well past. So on the ticketing side, I think we do somewhere between 500 and 750 tickets a week on average. And then that goes up dramatically when there's like major token launches or mass onboarding events. And so they answer tickets and they create documentation. I think our average response time now is less than 20 minutes, which is pretty great. We have 24/7 coverage.
Right.
And yeah, they just don't sleep and they answer questions all day long. And
but
by
it's
the way,
almost more like on-demand education then, right? Because obviously there's no undo button. If someone did a 20% slippage, like in some ways the ticket is like, sorry, man, like here's what you should do next time.
Yeah, there's definitely some of that, which I will admit, those guys, shout out to the support team, they are very thick-skinned to be able to survive in that world because it's a lot of yelling. And then listen, like we're doing whatever, 1.5 billion in volume a day. There are times where there are product errors as well, and we compensate people if things didn't work as expected and so on. But yeah, they do a lot of education. They're out there writing docs. They're kind of deep in the community, kind of assuaging people. We also have a very large and active DAO, so there's oftentimes questions about that and how the process works over there. So yeah, they are in the real trenches. People talk about meme coin trenches, like get into the support ticket trenches, and then you'll really know what war feels like. But thankfully, they're all just like obsessed with Jupiter and are able to make it work. And I think actually, as a little fun fact, the last 2 weeks, our CSAT score was 100%, which is pretty great.
That's impressive.
I was very proud of the team on that one.
Well, Kash, the most Web2 team in Web3. I mean that in the nicest way possible.
That is the funny, I could not imagine a funnier way of describing Jupiter. I absolutely love that, and I'm going to use that internally as well. Someone's head might explode, but I think it'll be very fun. I'm going to get
an angry email from Meow.
It's possible.
Awesome. Where can people find you, find the Jupiter streams?
Yeah, definitely. So thank you for plugging that for me, buddy. So you can find me on Twitter at Kash Dhanda, KASHDHANDA. But if you're interested in Jupiter, every Wednesday, like clockwork, we host this community call in public called the Planetary Call. And we treat that almost like how a normal founder would treat a board meeting, where we just come, we talk about all the products, all the new announcements, any new partnerships, major metrics, things like that. It's like an hour to an hour and a half. It is a lot of fun and gets pretty weird. So shout out to the chat who make it weird and send weird gifts a lot of the time. And yeah, that's probably the best way, like on a week-to-week basis, to stay up to date with what's going on at Jupiter.
Awesome. Well, Kash, thanks again for joining us.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, buddy.